Hey, it's Amy with Ask a Christian. If you've been hanging out with me for the last couple of video sessions, you know that the topic on my mind is pain and suffering and where did evil come from? As I talk to people more and more frequently about their spiritual beliefs through this project, I have definitely heard the question come up multiple times. If there's supposed to be a God and he's supposed to be good and loving, then why is the world in the state it's in? I'm committed to bringing you the biblical perspective on this topic so that you can measure it against different worldviews. And last section, we started to introduce the players in this Bible story of how evil, pain, and suffering came about. Last week, we looked at a parable or a teaching story in Matthew chapter 13, where Jesus says that he came in and created the world 100% good, but that an enemy, the devil, or Diabolos, as scripture calls it, crept in to destroy it. So we left off last week wondering, who is this Diabolos? Who is this slanderer? Who is this person that has it out against God, and why? So today we'll continue in that vein. We'll look at 3 stories, and I want you to feel free to stop this video at any time so that you can read the Bible ahead of my commentary. You can turn to Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 16 for our first story. Jesus here has just healed a woman who has been crippled for 18 years of her life. He's explaining to those around him the source of this woman's illness, and he says that the Satan has bound her. Now in English that word looks like Satan, and we say it's Satan, but in Hebrew the word Satan means the enemy. In story number 2, Jesus talks about this enemy, this Satan again. Turn to Luke chapter 10, verse 18. This story is a fun one for me and actually has a little bit of a sense of humor when I read it, because Jesus has just sent out 72 of his disciples, 72 of his followers, to heal the sick and to proclaim that he was the Son of God. At the end of their time away, the disciples come back and they are hyped. They almost seem like they're flexing because they've been able to toss out some of the evil spirits, the demonic powers that were afflicting the people. These guys were basically bragging, and Jesus had to check their ego a little bit because he told them, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." He was explaining to them that these powers that they're bragging about, he actually knew. They had been friends of his. He knew them in heaven. This is a huge plot twist as we are discovering the identity of this enemy. In story number 3, we find some major clues, a major piece of this puzzle. It's a Hebrew poem and prophecy found in Ezekiel 28, 12 through 19. Here the prophet Ezekiel is writing a lamentation or a tragedy about the king of Tyre who lived in ancient Phoenicia. The only thing is that Bible scholars from as far back as Tertullian and Origen, who lived in Phoenicia by the way, say that this story is not about any earthly king, but is actually about this Satan, this devil. Now for the sake of time, of course, I'm not going to read this with you, but I do want to go through some of the clues. So starting at verse 12, you'll notice that this king, this being, was described as perfect. And this connotes a kind of sinlessness that we don't see subscribed to mankind. Verse 13 says that this being was found in Eden, which is another huge clue because there were just a handful of beings in Eden. Carrying on in verse 13, we see mention of gold and of precious, semi-precious stones. And every Israelite who would have read this would have recognized those stones as 9 out of the 12 stones that belong in the Levitical priest's breastplate. The reason that the author is bringing up this kind of holy language and holy imagery is to give you a clue to the identity of this being. This is somebody who was close to God, close to the holy tabernacle. Verse 14 gets you even closer. The enemy is called the anointed cherub who was appointed guardian. Now this is huge. Exodus 25, 10 through 22 gives Israelites specific instructions on how to make a piece of furniture that belongs in the temple, in the sanctuary, called the Ark of the Covenant. This piece of furniture was to represent the actual throne of God in heaven. It was a type or a shadow representing God's throne, his rule, his government. And on either side of that piece of furniture, covering this ark, was a golden cherub. Now guys, get this. If this enemy was called an anointed cherub that covers, we know without a doubt that this language is taking us to that Ark of the Covenant and is taking us to the throne of God. We can ascertain that this enemy, this Satan, this Diabolos, was one of the angels that was actually standing guard around God's throne in heaven. Finally, in this verse, we have a couple of references: the holy mountain of God and walking among the fiery stones, both of which are supposed to reflect that this is a being who is in God's immediate presence. And Ezekiel goes out of his way to make it clear that this is somebody who is really, really close to God. Now, we'll talk more about the plot and the why in the next video, but just to summarize what we've got so far, we've got a God who claims to have made the world not only good, but exceedingly or abundantly good, who claims that there was an enemy, Diabolos, who crept in to take away that goodness, to bring evil and sin and suffering to the world. And now we're finding out that this person, this being, was a traitor. Up next, we'll look at how this enemy became a traitor and why God allowed it. That's all today. I hope you're enjoying the story. And as always, I'm wishing you joy and peace for your journey. Bye.